Michal was King Saul's youngest daughter. Michal's story became known in the Bible, especially because she became David's first wife. And in this video, you will understand everything the Bible says about who Michal was. The name Michal probably means who is like God. The biblical text records that the name of Saul's wife was Ainua, and although Saul had other children with at least one concubine, Michal was very likely was really the daughter of Ainua. And the Bible says Michal had an older sister named Merab. And when David began to be acclaimed in Israel, after defeating the giant Goliath for the power of the Lord, King Saul began to envy him. Saul knew that God was with David, but still wanted to destroy him. Moreover, when Goliath was still challenging the Israelites, the king of Israel promised to give his daughter in marriage to the man who could defeat the Philistine warrior. And it was in this context that King Saul considered to give Merab, the older sister of Michal, in marriage to David, on the condition that David would fight against the Philistines, hoping that he would be injured in battle. Initially, David declined the idea, claiming that he was not up to the king's son-in-law. In any case, for some unknown reason, Saul also simply changed his mind and handed me a mirror in marriage to the other man. Then Saul was informed that Michal, his other daughter, had fallen in love with David, and in his mind disturbed by jealousy, he glimpsed that union could favor him. This is because Saul plotted a true trap as a condition so that David could ease Michal. Again, David considered not having the status necessary to belong to the king's family, but attitudely, Saul wrote this situation, since David could not afford the dowry for the princess. Basically, Saul demanded as a dowry that David killed and circumcised 100 Philistines. Obviously, Saul believed that David would be killed in that mission, but that's not what happened. In fact, David not only survived Saul's plan, but instead of killing and circumcising 100 Philistines, he killed and circumcised 200 enemy men. So, in the face of David's bravery, Saul had no choice but to accept David as son-in-law. And in this way, David and Michal were married. And the young Israeli warrior. But even after the marriage between Michal and David, King Saul continued to hate his own son-in-law. The biblical text clearly informs that Saul feared David and had it as an enemy. Meanwhile, David's name was increasingly estimated in Israel, and Saul's madness worsened more and more, to the point that he directly looking for a way to kill David. Even one occasion after David got a great victory against the Philistines, Saul tried to kill him with a spear, but David managed to escape. However, the same night, King Saul sent messengers to David's house with orders to kill him for mourning. But Michal learned of his father's plot against David and warned him in time to flee. The Bible records that same night, Michal descended David by a window so that he would not be killed by the men of Saul. Then Michal put on David's bed a statue covered by a cloak and goat skin on his headboard. So when Saul's servants arrived, Michal told them that David was sick in bed. Saul's messengers then returned to the king, and Saul again sent his servants to David's house to capture him. And when Saul's men entered the house, they saw that in David's bed there was only one covered statue. Given this, Saul even questioned Michal because she helped David. And Michal lied to Saul, saying that David had threatened to kill her if she didn't help him. But by this time, the Saul plan had already been frustrated. Michal was Saul's daughter, but her commitment first was to her husband, David. In addition, Saul's hatred for David was unjustifiable. David had done nothing against Saul. In fact, David aroused the jealousy of the king of Israel just because he was himself. But the relationship between Michal and David was very troubled. Apparently, at the beginning of his marriage, Michal and David related very well, but when David had to flee from Saul and began to live as an outlaw, arbitrarily Saul took Michal and gave her as his wife to another man called Potiphar. After Saul's death, David got the support of Abner, who had been the commander of the Saul army in Israel, to assume the unified kingdom. And the first thing David demanded was Michal's return. Abner met David, and Michal's demand was again his wife. But it is possible that his separation from her current husband was somewhat traumatic. This is because the biblical text says that Potiphar suffered a lot from having lost Michal. However, It seems that the good relationship between David and Michal had been in the past, and the harmony between the two was no longer the same. Besides, at that point, David also had other wives. So some commentators believe that maybe Michal no longer seemed so interesting. Other scholars also suggest that David's occupations as king of Israel, added to everything he had passed as a fugitive from Saul, had turned him into a different person from the old young warrior. Like Michal, he was probably someone else after living with another husband. In any case, the end of the relationship between David and Michal was indeed melancholy. This was clear in the way Michal criticized David when he rejoiced before the Lord in the episode in which the covenant ark was brought to Jerusalem. This reaction of Michal, somewhat jealous and sarcastic, seems to have ended up with any consideration David had for her, as we read in the second book of Samuel, in chapter 6, between verses 16 and 23. And in this way, that relationship of romance and complicity that seemed so promising between David and Michal in his youth eventually found a sad and painful end. In addition, the princess of Israel, who was King David's first wife, ended her life without generating children.
Look, I have to congratulate you. You made it through a deep, unfiltered video. That takes attention, openness, and courage. So leave your city in the comments, or share a quote that stuck with you. If you feel this could help someone, send it their way. Thank you, Big Hug, and until next time.